Hi, and welcome to Creepy Crime Story, where the darkest truths aren't imagined. They're real. San Diego, California. Early summer 2016, a small apartment in the Allied Gardens neighborhood holds the final moments of 30-year-old Krystal Mitchell's life. She's in the city visiting friends from Phoenix, taking a break from her routine back home. By all accounts, she was healthy, upbeat, and looking forward to a weekend of socializing. Less than 24 hours after arriving, she's gone. Inside that apartment, first responders move methodically. Paramedics check for signs of life. The lead homicide detective steps in behind them, his eyes tracing the details. Displaced items, subtle disarray in what should have been a tidy living space. There's no sign of forced entry. No one has reported hearing a struggle. But the condition of the room does not align with the quiet story the neighbors tell. The call to 911 came from someone who knew Krystal, a friend she was staying with, reporting her unresponsive. The medical examiner's preliminary observation will later note injuries consistent with strangulation. That phrase, in the world of violent crime investigation, is both clinical and loaded. It narrows cause, narrows time, and in many cases narrows the pool of possible suspects. But at this stage, those findings are noted, not shared outside the investigative team. Digital evidence gathering starts within hours. Officers secure the scene and log every person who has been in and out of the building since Krystal's arrival. Security cameras in the lobby and at the elevator are pulled for review. Detectives will study those frames carefully, not just for who they show, but for when. Timestamps can be as critical as fingerprints. The window of time is short. Between the last confirmed sighting of Krystal alive and the emergency call, the apartment was occupied by at least one other person. That person is no longer there. And in homicide work, absence at a critical moment can be as telling as presence. From the start, the procedural path is clear. Establish the victim's last movements, lock the physical scene, and identify anyone with access in the final hours. The team works with a single geographic anchor, this Allied Gardens apartment, knowing that every next step will lead back here. The detectives will have to piece together a precise chain of events without contaminating the evidence or the timeline. For the audience, one question rises above the rest. If no one heard a struggle and there was no forced entry, what happened to Krystal Mitchell in that room? To understand what happened inside one room, investigators start with the person whose last verified movements ended there. Krystal Mitchell, 30, had traveled from Phoenix to San Diego for a short visit and was staying at a friend's apartment in the Allied Gardens neighborhood. The case team documents her routine, her plans, and the people who interacted with her in the 48 hours before she was found. This is victimology in practice, objective facts that sharpen the time window and define who had real-world access to the primary scene. Scene control and information control run in parallel. At the apartment, officers inventory personal effects and identify active devices. Within hours, detectives issue preservation requests to carriers and platforms. So call detail records, message timestamps, and app login metadata are not lost to routine deletion. Nothing here is speculative. Timestamps, not impressions, are the backbone. When digital time aligns with what cameras later show, the timeline holds. When it doesn't, the gap becomes a lead. Travel verification is methodical. The team confirms Krystal's departure from Phoenix, arrival in San Diego, and lodging at the Allied Gardens unit through messages, receipts, and corroborating witnesses. The hosting friend establishes baseline normal inside the apartment, what was where, what changed, and who legitimately had a key. In apartment cases, baseline is evidence. Deviations are noted and compared against the short interval between the last confirmed contact and the 911 call. Access is narrowed with building records. Management confirms lock status, maintenance entries, and recent work orders. If the property has common area cameras, investigators pull lobby and elevator video for the relevant hours and log entries and exits to the extent footage exists. They are not trying to prove a theory. They are testing claims against systems that measure time. A camera frame without a corresponding device event, or a device event without a frame, requires explanation. The data align too cleanly. Sometimes that was the problem. Interviews proceed outward from the apartment. The host, immediate neighbors, and the last people to see Krystal in public are interviewed for precise times, not estimates. Late is converted into a clock reading tied to a receipt, a rideshare drop, or a time-stamped message. Statements are tagged as objective, anchored to a verifiable time source, or subjective, memory only. Both are kept. Only one can carry the timeline. The contact chain forms quickly. Family in Arizona, friends in San Diego, and the man she was seeing during the trip. He is documented as a companion with recent in-person contact and potential access to the building, but the file notes the presumption of innocence and the need for corroboration. In cities like San Diego, murders aren't just crimes. They test how well systems align under pressure. The case advances by comparing what people say to what clocks record. Device handling stays conservative. A phone that stops transmitting might be powered off, out of coverage, or deliberately disabled. Investigators avoid drawing meaning from a single data point. A message sent without read status could reflect timing and nothing more. That is why each digital event is mapped to an external reference, a badge swipe if present, a camera frame, a verified transaction, or a confirmed ride. The apartment remains the anchor. Every path returns to that one scene. Risk factors are documented without judgment. Detectives check for recent disputes, restraining orders, or abrupt changes in routine that might intersect with access. If none exist in public record, the absence is recorded as such. Interviews capture whether Krystal made any voice calls because duration and tone can help anchor the last live contact more reliably than text alone. Those details are logged for the medical and forensic chapters to follow. They are not argued here. By the close of this phase, investigators possess three essentials: a verified reason for Krystal's presence in San Diego, a preserved set of digital records tied to the critical hours, and an access list that can withstand courtroom scrutiny. No conclusions about cause or responsibility are drawn in this chapter. The outcome is a coherent contact map that supports the next step, testing the public timeline outside the apartment against the devices and the cameras. Procedurally, this is where coherent true crime storytelling earns trust. Fewer adjectives, more anchors, fewer theories, more clocks. For the audience, one practical question remains. If your timeline depends on people and on devices, which breaks first under scrutiny? From a locked apartment scene and a verified contact chain, the next step is movement outside the door. Detectives reconstruct the last night Krystal Mitchell was seen alive in public because the hours before a homicide often supply the only neutral record of how people moved, who intervened, and when timelines begin to tighten. The aim here isn't to argue motive. It's to replace impressions with time-stamped events the case can carry forward. The evening begins with routine socializing. Krystal is in San Diego for a short visit, staying at a friend's apartment in Allied Gardens. She goes out with the man she is seeing, Raymond R.J. McLeod, and they are observed at a neighborhood bar. Staff and patrons remember a disagreement that escalated into a physical altercation. One witness describes stepping in to separate them. That account matters for two reasons. It establishes both proximity and volatility in a public setting, and it tags a point in time that can be cross-checked against transactions, phone activity, and any exterior cameras near that location. Investigators obtain the business's surveillance if available and lock receipts from the relevant window. Even when interior footage is limited, a register record, card authorization, or a closing report can narrow minutes. The team then aligns those minutes with messages and calls extracted under proper legal process. A text sent from one device at 10x p.m., if it exists, gets lined up against a receipt printed the same minute. Alignment is the goal, contradiction is the lead. Leaving the bar, accounts diverge on tone, but not on the key fact. Both individuals return to the Allied Gardens building later that night. The property's common area cameras, lobby, elevator, corridor if present, supply the most reliable entries on who came back and when. Investigators review the frames frame by frame, logging the exact minute a person crosses the lens, when an elevator door closes, and how long the car takes to return to the lobby. Those small intervals matter when the next morning's emergency call sits at the end of a short window. Where footage exists, it is compared against the contact chain built in Chapter 2. If Krystal's device shows a final outgoing message shortly before building entry, that timestamp is recorded without commentary. If no such message exists, that absence is recorded with equal weight. The discipline here is simple. Document the event or document that it didn't occur. Either can help explain why the interior scene looked disturbed while neighbors reported a quiet night. Witnesses at the bar provide sworn statements that are cataloged by source and confidence. Staff members tend to produce more consistent time anchors because shift logs and closing routines force precision. Patrons can still be valuable, particularly those who intervened, but their accounts are tested against the system clocks. Where a patron recalls close to closing, investigators seek a cash-out record to convert that phrase into a concrete time. What cannot be converted stays labeled as subjective recollection and isn't allowed to carry the spine of the timeline. Back at the building, the elevator sequence becomes a focal point. In residential cases, the elevator functions like a partial access log. A camera can catch who steps in, how many people share the car, and whether anyone follows. If the lens captures both Krystal and M.u.r.d.e.r returning on the same trip or minutes apart, that is noted. If only one is visible, that is also noted. The point is to fix the order of movements without speculating about intent inside the apartment. The interior remains off camera. The case file refuses to invent what a camera didn't see. Device activity is folded in with the same restraint. Investigators compare the final messages and any late-night app pings against the elevator timestamps. If a device stops transmitting after re-entering the building, that fact is logged and set aside for the forensic chapter that follows. It is not used here to predict what will be found. A phone that goes quiet could be powered down, left on a counter, or inside a bag with a dying battery. The job in this chapter is to chart when public-facing activity ceased, not to import meaning that belongs to evidence processing later. 2 additional checks prevent drift. First, investigators verify that no delivery services, ride shares, or building maintenance entries intersect with the return window. An unexpected knock at a door can alter a sequence, and a maintenance badge, if the property uses electronic credentials, can explain an elevator trip that doesn't fit the pattern. Second, the team looks for any neighbor reports of footsteps, voices, or hallway movement. Even when neighbors recall nothing, that absence helps bracket how much of the night remained quiet outside the unit. With those pieces in place, detectives introduce M.u.r.d.e.r's name formally into the narrative record while stating the legal status plainly. He is the man last seen publicly with Krystal and is presumed innocent. His documented presence at the bar, the intervention reported by a witness, and the building return sequence define an objective corridor of time. That corridor ends at a locked apartment door and a 911 call the next day. The investigation now has a clear chain of public events to compare with what the medical examiner and crime scene specialist will later document inside. For viewers, what matters about this work is not the drama of a bar argument. It's the discipline of turning a jumbled night into a clean set of times. In a city as large as San Diego, the difference between rumor and record is a few good clocks. When those clocks line up across cash registers, cameras, and devices, the story becomes testable. When they don't, the gap is where investigators look next. A brief human note belongs here. Cases like this are not abstractions. A mother comes to a coastal city for a short visit and fails to live through the night. The careful way a timeline is built, with no invented scenes and no theatrical leaps, isn't just procedure. It's a way to honor the gravity of what happened by refusing to pad the record. That approach may feel slower in the moment, but it is what allows a case to survive courtroom scrutiny years later. The chapter closes with a single, practical observation from a veteran detective reviewing the alignment board. The timestamps match more cleanly than expected for a chaotic night out. The data aligned too cleanly. Sometimes that was the problem. That skepticism doesn't accuse, it prioritizes where to measure next. Inside the room. The story advances only if the room speaks clearly. Once the Allied Gardens apartment is cleared by medics, the homicide team turns it into a controlled forensic workspace. A single entry log is posted at the door. Every person who crosses the threshold is recorded with time, role, and purpose. The room is documented as found, wide shots, mid-range, and close-ups, then a second sequence after each item is moved. That order matters later when attorneys test whether the scene was altered or merely examined. The visible area is mapped before it is touched. Investigators capture a measured sketch and a high-resolution photo set to fix distances among key objects, furniture alignment, bedding position, and any displaced items that suggest a struggle rather than routine clutter. They do not chase narratives, they chase disruptions. If an object shows fresh transfer marks or unusual orientation, it's photographed with scale and flagged for later laboratory work. The apartment remains the only primary scene for this crime story. Nothing in this chapter moves us elsewhere. Search methodology follows a grid pattern, so no section is skipped. High-touch surfaces, door handles, light switches, countertops, appliance pulls are swabbed for potential touch DNA. The bedding receives special handling. Each layer is bagged separately, then sealed with evidence tape, initials, and date. Tape lifts are used on select fabrics to capture trace fibers or shed epithelial cells without destroying the material. This yields options later if traditional swabs are insufficient. Latent print development is performed on non-porous items, devices, bottles, a mirrored surface, only after photography, so the enhancement chemicals don't preempt documentation. Alternate light source screening is used in a non-destructive pass to identify possible biological material or transfer patterns that aren't visible under ambient light. If a pattern is detected, it's marked, imaged, and preserved, not interpreted at the scene. Interpretation belongs in the lab and in court where context and controls can be applied. The team avoids phrases that push beyond what the evidence can sustain. Suggestive of and consistent with are not hedges, they're guardrails. Timing is addressed through the only reliable method available: correlation. Body temperature declines, lividity and rigor have margins of error wide enough to mislead. Instead, investigators set the interior observations against the external timeline already built: bar receipts, camera frames, device activity. The question isn't, what time did this happen in a vacuum? It's, does the interior sequence contradict or support what the clocks outside already say? Where there's alignment, the case gains stability. Where there's a gap, detectives press. The medical examiner's work proceeds on a parallel track. The autopsy is conducted with standard documentation: external overview, internal examination, and injury cataloging. Findings described later in public proceedings note injuries consistent with strangulation. The phrasing matters. It reflects the pattern and location of trauma without asserting a motive or a specific mechanism not captured on video. Toxicology samples are drawn. Fingernail scrapings and hand swabs are collected in case trace material transfers under force. Any petechiae, neck, or facial bruising patterns or internal neck tissue damage are recorded clinically for future testimony. The case file keeps the medical language intact. It does not translate it into entertainment. Chain of custody is maintained without exception. Each swab, each lift, each bagged item is sealed, labeled, and logged with unique identifiers. Transfers between personnel are time-stamped. If a defense team later argues contamination, the record must show where every item was and who had it. That's not drama, that's admissibility. In high-profile cases that span years, chain integrity prevents a hearing from becoming a referendum on memory. A device triage is conducted only after the scene is secured. If a phone or tablet is present, it's photographed in situ, then placed in a signal-blocking sleeve. Any immediate on-screen notifications are documented without swiping or unlocking to avoid altering metadata. Warrants already in motion from earlier chapters are executed before content extraction. The objective is to bind interior artifacts to the external timeline. For example, a final app notification time inside the apartment weighed against a camera timestamp from the lobby. A single digital point standing alone proves very little. A network of points that agree builds a spine that can carry the case to court. The room itself is read for force indicators. Investigators look for fresh scuffing where knees or heels could have braced, fasteners that have torn, or fabric tension that suggests an event rather than sleep. They check whether light furniture is out of typical alignment or whether a bedside surface shows recent displacement patterns. None of this is proof by itself. Each observation is paired with a photograph, a measurement, and a place in the sequence log. The strength of the case comes from completeness, not color. At the same time, restraint is practiced. The team does not invent a ligature if none is recovered. They do not announce cleanup if there's no public record of it. They avoid overreading the position of household items without corroboration. The standard in a U.S. homicide investigation is not to connect dots until the dots are confirmed. Later, at the autopsy review, the investigative lead and the prosecutor discuss phrasing. Cause of death versus manner of death are not interchangeable. With injuries described as consistent with strangulation, the medical documentation remains clinical while the legal system tests competing explanations. That will happen at hearings, not in the lab. The narrative you're hearing stays inside the documented boundary, what was seen, collected, and recorded, no more, no less. For viewers, a brief note on why this matters. Cases involving intimate partners demand rigor because the evidence lives in ordinary rooms. The lack of forced entry, the short time window, and the clinical injury findings make for a high-stakes puzzle that cannot depend on rumor or hindsight. This is why the apartment is treated like a laboratory and why the language stays careful. It isn't coldness. It's a way to protect the case and the truth over years of litigation. As the team seals the last evidence bag, the interior picture is no longer a set of impressions. It's a documented sequence waiting to be tested against what's already known outside the door. The next move is to place the scene science beside the departure data, a comparison that shifts the investigation from a single room to a cross-border search without breaking the story into two tracks. For a homicide anchored to one apartment, the biggest shift occurs when the timeline leaves the building. After the forensic sweep you heard in Chapter 4, investigators widen the perimeter from the Allied Gardens unit to the city itself and then beyond it. The question is no longer only what happened in a room, it's who left San Diego, how fast, and on what traceable path. The approach is methodical and law-driven because the next steps, warrants, federal involvement, and cross-border coordination, must stand up years later. Detectives begin with exit indicators. Airlines, car rental firms, bus lines, and border agencies each maintain records created in the course of business. The case team issues preservation requests and, where required, seeks court authority for production. They are not guessing. They are testing whether travel occurred in the narrow hours after Krystal Mitchell was last seen alive. When a homicide investigation can tie a recent companion to rapid departure, the story gains momentum without opinion. It's a clock problem, interior events on one side, mobility on the other. Public statements from authorities later confirm a core fact. The man last seen publicly with Krystal, Raymond R.J. McLeod, left California and fled to Mexico shortly after the homicide. That single line changes the posture of the case. A local crime with a local scene now has an international component. It doesn't rewrite the story. It extends it. The apartment in Allied Gardens remains the anchor, and will remain the anchor throughout this series. Everything that happens next is measured against what was collected there and when the emergency call was made. Once cross-border flight is established, the file takes on a federal layer. Local prosecutors can charge homicide under state law, but no local warrant reaches across an international border by itself. To hunt a defendant believed to have left the United States to avoid prosecution, authorities use a federal tool, UFAP, unlawful flight to avoid prosecution. In early 2017, after coordination among the San Diego Police Department, the San Diego County District Attorney's Office, the U.S. Marshals Service, and the U.S. Attorney's Office, a UFAP warrant is obtained. That warrant does not change the underlying state charge. It allows federal agents to treat the target as a fugitive and to work with foreign partners to locate and arrest him for return to face the state case. Behind the scenes, that UFAP step sets in motion a standard playbook. The U.S. Marshals Service opens a fugitive investigation and coordinates with the U.S. Marshals International Investigations Branch and regional U.S. Marshals Service, Mexico, Latin America, foreign field offices, and liaisons. Attachés work with host nation police through established channels. In parallel, prosecutors prepare paperwork streams that may later be needed for extradition, affidavits, certified copies of the underlying charges, and documentation showing the person sought is the same person named. None of this is dramatic. All of it is essential. Cross-border fugitive work is paperwork first, fieldwork second. From a detective's perspective, the next step is building a durable path of travel. You do not need every mile. You need credible pins. Authorities publicly report that after Mexico, sightings in 2017 placed McLeod in Guatemala, and additional reports in 2018 placed him in Belize. Those pins matter for two reasons. First, they confirm sustained foreign presence, not a brief border hop. Second, they set expectations for search radius and tactics. English-speaking traveler, former Marine, visible tattoos moving through Central America. Leads arriving through public tip lines are screened for location, date, and source quality. Tips without time anchors are noted and held. Tips with photographs, employer references, or specific addresses go forward for on-the-ground checks by partner agencies. Interagency work inside the U.S. continues alongside the overseas effort. The Marshals coordinate with Customs and Border Protection, Homeland Security investigations, and State Department elements to flag travel identities and monitor for document use or attempted re-entry under any alias. Financial leads, when lawfully obtained, are examined for use patterns, ATM withdrawals, retail transactions, or money transfer services. In fugitive cases, genuine identities often drop away while recurring behaviors remain. A gym habit, a teaching job, certain nightlife spots, those are searchable patterns if sources report them. The case team asks specific questions of informants: name used, phone used, employer name, tattoos observed, vehicle type, and whether the subject spoke Spanish or relied on English. Answers go into a structured database so real signals aren't buried by volume. It is important to say what is not claimed here. This chapter does not add unverified vehicle finds, unreported border inspection hits, or alleged statements attributed to unnamed sources. It reflects what authorities have made public about departure to Mexico, later sightings in Guatemala and Belize, and the formal UFAP escalation in 2017. The rest of these paragraphs explain how a U.S. homicide case moves once the target is outside the country, not what any secret record in this case might show. That distinction keeps the narrative accurate and court-safe. With UFAP in place, investigators also prepare for a different kind of evidence fight: identity. When a suspect lives abroad, defense challenges later often focus on whether the right person was arrested and whether the chain from photo to person is solid. To prevent that, the team assembles a robust identification package: high-resolution photographs, known tattoos and scars, height and build estimates from booking histories, and any unique features that translate across languages. If a witness in Central America says the subject was teaching English, investigators will want employment applications, class rosters, or even discarded drafts with handwriting to corroborate. These are habits, not rumors. Habits can be proved. The human stakes do not disappear in this paperwork. A homicide compresses a family's life into the language of evidence. Hearing that the person linked to your child's final hours has moved freely across borders is not an abstract harm. It is time you never get back. Departments that do this work well share just enough. There has been movement. The case is active. Foreign partners are engaged, without releasing operational detail that would jeopardize a future arrest. It is a narrow line, and it is walked here. By mid-2017, the case has two clear spines. The first is local: Allied Gardens, one apartment, a short window, and a medical record noting injuries consistent with strangulation. The second is international: Mexico, then Guatemala, 2017, then Belize, 2018, with the UFAP warrant allowing U.S. authorities to coordinate across borders. From a narrative standpoint, it is still one story. The room and the road are not separate arcs. They are the same clock, measured in different places. As the months pass, a practical problem emerges. Attention fades unless you build a reason for the public to keep looking. The marshals and local prosecutors prepare targeted releases that show updated photos and emphasize distinguishing features. This is not branding, it is case strategy. Public recognition drives tips, and tips in foreign countries often come from communities that notice a newcomer living on cash, staying in budget apartments, or taking short-term work that favors fluent English. A well-made poster or a short segment on a news broadcast can revive a case that would otherwise drift. When the authorities later elevate M.u.r.d.e.r to the U.S. Marshals' 15 Most Wanted list in April 2021, that move will formalize the strategy. But the groundwork, UFAP, identity packets, partner coordination, was laid here in 2017. There is also a legal reason to remain disciplined in these middle chapters. Extradition is a legal process, not a handoff. If and when a suspect is arrested abroad, the record that supports his return must be clean. True copies of charges, sworn affidavits, correct dates, and consistent descriptions that match the person in custody to the person charged. Sloppy language in early reports becomes ammunition later. This is why the team repeats certain phrases exactly, like injuries consistent with strangulation and presumed innocent when naming M.u.r.d.e.r. Precision is not cosmetic. It preserves the pathway home. To close this chapter, connect the two boards in your head, the scene board and the movement board. On one side, a mapped room, a fixed window, and medical documentation that will be litigated in hearings to come. On the other, a departure south, official confirmation of flight to Mexico, and substantiated sightings in Guatemala and Belize, all under a UFAP warrant obtained in 2017. There is no second story running beside the first. There is one story moving forward on two fronts, both of which lead back to a San Diego courtroom. UFAP made the hunt possible. The 15 Most Wanted move made it visible. After months of cross-border work described in Chapter 5, investigators and prosecutors pivoted to a different lever: public recognition at scale. In April 2021, the U.S. Marshals Service added Raymond R.J. McLeod to its 15 Most Wanted list in connection with the crime that began in a San Diego apartment. That designation did not change the charge or the presumption of innocence. It changed the way the case could gather leads. The criteria for the list are narrow: serious offense, demonstrated flight, credible belief the person is alive, and a reasonable expectation that public exposure can produce actionable tips. McLeod's file met those points. The escalation came with a reward announcement to stimulate information flow. Posters, bulletins, and broadcast packages were produced using verified identifiers. Multiple clear photographs, physical descriptors, and distinct tattoos documented in earlier records. The wording stayed precise to protect the case: no speculation, no invented backstory, and no promises beyond the reward terms. Public campaigns only work when channels are ready to catch the response. Tip lines were staffed so that calls, emails, and web submissions were tagged by location and immediacy. Credible tips, those with timestamps, exact addresses, employers, or images, moved first. Reports that simply repeated rumors were logged and deprioritized but not discarded. In a multi-year fugitive chase, memory and rumor tend to blur. The system has to separate what can be checked today from what cannot be verified at all. International coordination tightened. U.S. Marshals liaisons circulated the updated bulletins to partner agencies in Mexico and Central America, where earlier sightings had placed McLeod in 2017 and 2018. The packets included the identifiers most likely to travel intact across borders: tattoos and scars, height and build, and any known language use. These details help when names change. A billboard or a targeted post can be ignored. A visible forearm tattoo in a small town is harder to hide. The point of the list is not fear. It is recall: a store clerk, a teacher, a neighbor realizing they have seen the same face more than once. Family advocacy amplified visibility without compromising the file. Krystal Mitchell's mother, herself with a law enforcement background, kept the case in the public eye, encouraging tips to official channels and reinforcing the message that the investigation was active. This is a delicate balance. Investigators need the public's help but cannot publish operational detail. The best campaigns, including this one, used clear calls to action. If you see this person, do not intervene. Document the time and place. Contact authorities. Precision saves lives and prevents contaminated leads. Digital strategy evolved with the times. Alongside traditional wanted posters, the marshals and partner agencies pushed assets optimized for mobile screens. Square images, bold identifiers, and short call-to-action lines translated where appropriate. Geo-targeted posts focused on regions that historically drew English-speaking travelers or expatriate communities. None of this guaranteed a break, but it widened the net to places a fugitive might seek routine: language schools, bars that cater to travelers, gyms, and seasonal work hubs. Each post, each segment, each brief interview was designed to generate one thing: an anchored tip with a time and a place. On the back end, a triage matrix kept the effort disciplined. Tips were scored on three axes: recency, specificity, and corroboration. A report that someone looked like the target was scored low, unless paired with a photograph or a hard address. A claim that the target was teaching English at a local school moved higher if it named the school or provided a staff contact. Leads that reached a verification threshold were forwarded to in-country partners for discreet checks. When a case is international, discretion is not optional. It protects both civilians and the integrity of future extradition proceedings. It is necessary to say what this chapter does not do. It does not introduce new forensic claims about the apartment or restate injury findings from Chapter 4. It does not retell the border departures from Chapter 5. This chapter tracks a single development: how a fugitive investigation became a public hunt by design, under rules that preserve the case for court. The apartment in Allied Gardens remains the anchor. The list and reward are tools to bring the person named in the warrant back to that jurisdiction. There is a human reason to take time with this step. When a suspect crosses borders, timelines tend to stretch, and families can feel as if the case has gone cold. A national list with a clear reward is an institutional way of saying the opposite. The case is active, the file is resourced, and a stranger's attention could matter. That attention must be channeled into facts. Where, when, how do you know, so detectives can move from screen to street without losing accuracy. As 2021 progressed, the campaign created what investigators need most in long chases: sustained visibility. The earlier spines you've heard, one room in San Diego, one departure south under UFAP, now had a third support: the public's eyes and memory, organized and measurable. The next break would come because someone recognized the face and said the right words to the right line. By mid-2025, the M.u.r.d.e.r case had moved into a critical but often overlooked stage of the criminal process: pretrial. Court records from San Diego County show that prosecutors and defense counsel were locked in a series of motions, each side testing the strength of the evidence and the admissibility of key witness statements. At this point, the state's case rested on a combination of direct and circumstantial evidence. The autopsy on Krystal Mitchell had confirmed manual strangulation as the cause of death. The forensic pathologist's report detailed bruising patterns on her neck and petechial hemorrhaging in the eyes, findings consistent with sustained compression. Toxicology screens revealed no substances that could have incapacitated her, ruling out certain defense theories. Physical evidence collected from the crime scene in the San Diego apartment included fingerprints matching M.u.r.d.e.r on multiple surfaces, strands of hair consistent with the victim clutched in her hand, and a partial shoe print near the entryway. Digital forensics added another layer. Cell tower records placed M.u.r.d.e.r's phone in the immediate vicinity during the window of time estimated for Mitchell's death, and metadata from his device showed a sudden cessation of activity minutes after the likely time of death. The defense had signaled its intent to challenge the chain of custody for several exhibits, focusing on whether all evidence had been properly documented and stored. They also filed motions to exclude certain statements M.u.r.d.e.r allegedly made while in custody, arguing that procedural safeguards were not followed to the letter. Prosecutors countered with body cam footage from arresting agents and contemporaneous reports to show compliance. Witness testimony was expected to be central. Friends of Mitchell were prepared to recount her fear of M.u.r.d.e.r and her plans to end the relationship. Investigators who participated in the years-long manhunt were lined up to detail the fugitive's movements, including the period he spent in Central and South America before his capture in El Salvador in 2022. That testimony would underscore the state's theory that flight indicated consciousness of guilt. As the summer of 2025 progressed, scheduling conferences set tentative trial dates, but no firm start was confirmed. The court docket reflected ongoing negotiations over which expert witnesses would be allowed, including specialists in forensic pathology, digital evidence, and behavioral analysis. From a broader perspective, this phase of the case highlighted a reality often missed in high-profile crime stories. The years after an arrest can be filled with meticulous legal groundwork that determines what the jury will and will not hear. For Krystal Mitchell's family, each delay was another reminder that justice, while moving forward, was still out of reach. By mid-2025, nearly a decade has passed since 30-year-old Krystal Mitchell was found dead in a San Diego apartment. The medical examiner determined she had been strangled, a violent end to a life filled with promise. From the moment the investigation identified her boyfriend, Raymond R.J. McLeod, as the primary suspect, the case became one of the most challenging fugitive pursuits in recent U.S. crime history. McLeod's flight took him across borders, evading capture for more than 6 years. In 2022, coordinated work between U.S. and marshals, Mexican authorities, and local police brought him into custody in Central America. His return to San Diego marked a turning point, but not an end. The legal process has since moved slowly, with multiple pretrial hearings, procedural motions, and scheduling delays. As of August 2025, no trial date has been set. For Krystal's family, these years have been a test of endurance. Her mother has become a public advocate for domestic violence awareness, using her daughter's story to reach those who might be in danger but feel trapped. Their presence in every hearing, their refusal to let Krystal's memory fade, has ensured the case remains visible. This case is more than a record in the court system. It is a reminder of the gaps that can exist between the moment a crime is committed and the delivery of justice. It speaks to the resilience of families who must live in that in-between space, where closure is promised but not yet realized. The path forward remains uncertain, but the commitment to see it through is unwavering. Justice, however delayed, is still worth pursuing, not only for Krystal, but for every victim whose voice can no longer speak for itself. Looking back on this case, I'm reminded how fragile life is and how quickly everything can change. Justice may move slowly, but every step forward matters for the victim, for their family, and for the community watching. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this: speak up, stand firm, and never ignore the warning signs of abuse. Your voice could save a life. What about you? Have you or someone you know ever faced a moment where silence felt safer, but speaking out was the right choice? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Let me know where you're watching from or share your perspective in the comments. And if this story moved you, please subscribe so you don't miss the next one.